Hello everyone. This is our second history lesson. Last week we learned about the traditional lifestyle of the Aboriginal people, particularly the ones who lived in the Sydney area. We looked at the type of shelters that they lived in. They lived in caves, they lived in huts made out of sticks and bark. In Tasmania, in the colder climates, they built stronger shelters that could hold the whole family. We also learned about what type of food they ate. Many of the people around the Sydney area relied on fish and shellfish from the harbour, but they also ate kangaroos and birds and other animals. We looked at the tools that they used for hunting, and also we looked at how the archaeologists, the people who study how older people lived, how they know that this was how they lived, by examining the shell middens and by the journals and drawings of the early explorers and the colonists who came to Australia. In our lesson today, I'll just share our PowerPoint. In our lesson today, we're going to be looking again at the traditional Australian Aboriginal people. This time we'll be looking at more of their culture, rather than about what they ate, where they lived. So let's first have a look at our what we've learned. This is the second lesson, as I said before. After this one, this is the last one where we talk directly about the Aboriginal people. We go on to look at the explorers before Captain Cook came to Australia, and then we go on to look at the settlement of Sydney following and the events that led up to that. Our learning intention for today is to understand the culture of the Australian Aboriginal people before British colonisation. And if we are successful in our learning intention, you should be able to describe how the Aboriginal people pass on traditional knowledge, how they tell Dreamtime stories, and conduct rites and ceremonies. Okay, so let's start by looking at this word culture. So the culture of a people are the beliefs, customs, their arts of a particular society or group of people at a particular place or time. Now, if we were to describe the culture of present-day Australian people, we would talk about our love of beaches and barbecues. We'd talk about our religions, our art, our dance, celebrations and traditions. And that's what we'll be focusing on in today's history lesson, these aspects of the traditional Aboriginal people. So let's start with looking at their language. The traditional Aboriginal people had many languages. There was not one unifying language like we have in Australia now with English, where almost everyone in the country, across the whole of the country, speaks English. Back before the English came to Australia, each tribe had their own version of a language. And in the Sydney area, they believe that there were about 29 different tribes of Aboriginal people, and each of them had their own version of a language. Now, that's not to say that they couldn't communicate with each other. Tribes that lived alongside each other often spoke sometimes the same language, but also slightly different languages. So that they would still have some words in common. Now, this map is showing us the approximate areas of each of the Aboriginal language groups in Australia. Each splotch of colour indicates a different language. There were estimated to be about 250 different languages in Australia, and many of the languages are still used by a small group of the tribe. Only 13 of the languages are being taught to children in schools now. So this map is from before British settlement, or what they understand of it, that it was like before British settlement. And even though this map shows the area that each tribe lived in, the tribes would often come together for trading or ceremonies of singing and dancing called corroborees. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay. Our next slide is looking at how the anthropologists believe the Aboriginal people came to Australia. Now, anthropologist is a very big word, it describes the scientist And these scientists are people who study people, like where did they come from and how did people evolve. Now, these anthropologists believe that the Aboriginal people migrated to Australia possibly 60,000 years ago or more. They're still finding evidence that makes that a longer time. So this map shows what Australia and Southeast Asia would have looked like at this time. So you can see this is the original map of Australia that we know today. And up here is Papua New Guinea and Indonesia. And we'll go on and look at what this area is here now. Okay. It was during the Ice Age, and in the Ice Age it was a lot colder on Earth and there were many more glaciers. Now glaciers are frozen rivers, and because they hold frozen water, the level of the oceans was a lot lower because it was colder, so the rivers were frozen and there was more water on the land held up in ice, so that there was less water in the ocean. And because there was less water in the ocean, these land bridges formed between continents and between islands. And the anthropologists believe that the Aboriginal people crossed this land bridge during the Ice Age to allow people to move between the land masses. And as the Earth warmed and many of the glaciers melted, the oceans filled up and covered the land bridges, leaving Australia as an island continent, cut off from its neighbours. The Aboriginal people don't believe this. They believe that they have always been in Australia and are made from the earth. I'm going to finish this video now and I'm going to start a new one and with that new one, we're going to be looking at the beginning of a recording that talks about what the Aboriginal people believe was how they evolved in Australia. I'm going to finish and we'll come back with a new video session.